Amalek's war against Israel. As punishment because they did not have sufficient faith in God and had doubted whether he could fulfill their wishes, and had grown negligent in the study of the Torah and in observance of the laws, God turned Amalek against them during their sojourn in Rephidim, where they had committed these sins. God dealt with them as that man with his son, who he carried through the river of life on his shoulders. Whenever the child saw something desirable, he said, "Father, buy it for me," and he fulfilled the child's wish. After the son had in this way received many beautiful things from his father, he called to a passing stranger with these words, "Have you seen my father?" Then, indignantly, the father said to his son, "You that sit on my shoulder, are you a fool? All that you desired I got for you, and now you ask that man, 'Have you seen my father?'" Then the father threw the child off his shoulder, and a dog came and bit him. So did Israel fare. When they moved out of Egypt, God enveloped them in 7 clouds of glory. They wished for bread, and he gave them manna. They wished for flesh, and he gave them quails. Then, after all their wishes had been granted, they began to doubt, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" Then God answered, "You doubt my power. As you live, you will discover it. The dog will soon bite you." Then came Amalek. The enemy of Israel bore the name Amalek to denote the rapidity with which he moved against Israel, for like a swarm of locusts he flew upon them. And the name furthermore designates the purpose of this enemy, who came to suck the blood of Israel. This Amalek was a son of Eliphaz, the first son of Esau, and although the descendants of Jacob had been weaker and more insignificant in earlier times, Amalek had left them in peace, for he had excellent reasons to delay his attack. God had revealed to Abraham that his seed would have to serve in the land of the Egyptians, and had put the payment of this debt on Isaac, and after his death upon Jacob and his descendants. The wicked Amalek now said to himself, "If I destroy Jacob and his descendants, God will impose the Egyptian bondage upon me, grandson of Esau, descendant of Abraham." Therefore he kept himself in restraint as long as Israel lived in Egypt. But after the bondage predicted had been served in full, he set out to accomplish the war of annihilation against Israel, which his grandfather Esau had enjoined on him. No sooner had he heard of Israel's departure from Egypt than he set out against them and met them by the Red Sea. There, indeed, he could do them no harm, for Moses uttered against him the ineffable name. So great was his confusion that he was forced to retreat without having effected his object. Then for some time he lay in ambush, and in this way molested Israel. But after a while he gave up this game of hide-and-seek, and with a bold front revealed himself as the enemy of Israel. He was not alone, however, when he declared war on Israel. He had also seduced the heathen nations to assist him in this war. Although these nations declined to make war on Israel, fearing that they might suffer like the Egyptians, they agreed to the following plan of Amalek. He said, "Follow my expedition. Should Israel conquer me, then there will still be plenty of time for you to flee. But should success crown my attempt, join your fate to mine and war against Israel." So Amalek now marched from his settlement in Seir, which was no less than 400 parasangs away from the encampment of the Jews, and although 5 nations, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, the Amorites, and the Canaanites, lived closer to the Jews than he did, he insisted upon being the first to declare war on Israel. God punished Israel, who had shown themselves an ungrateful people, by sending against them an enemy that was ungrateful too, never recalling that he owed his own life to the sons of Jacob, who had had him in their power after the brilliant victory over Esau and his followers. Before going over to open attack, he lured many unsuspecting Jews to death by his kindly words. He had fetched from Egypt the table of descent of the Jews. for every Jew there had to mark his name on the bricks produced by him, and these lists lay in the Egyptian archives. Familiar with the names of the different Jewish families, Amalek appeared before the Jewish camp and called the people by name. He invited them to leave the camp and come out to him. Reuben, Simon, Levi, and so on he would call. "Come out to me, your brother, and let's do some business." Those who answered the enticing call found certain death at his hands. And not only did Amalek kill them, but he also mutilated their corpses, following the example of his grandfather Esau by cutting off a certain part of the body and throwing it toward heaven with the mocking words, "Here shall you have what you desire." In this way did he jeer at the token of the Abrahamic covenant. So long as the Jews remained within the encampment, he could, of course, do them no harm, for the cloud enveloped them, and under its shelter they were well fortified, as a city that is surrounded by a solid wall. The cloud, however, covered only those who were pure, but the unclean had to stay outside it until they were cleansed by a ritual bath, and these Amalek caught and killed. The sinners, too, particularly the tribe of Dan, who were all worshippers of idols, were not protected by the cloud, and were therefore exposed to the attacks of Amalek. Moses did not himself set out to battle against this dangerous foe of Israel, but he sent his servant Joshua, and for good reasons. Moses knew that only a descendant of Rachel, like the Ephraimite Joshua, could conquer the descendant of Esau. All the sons of Jacob had taken part in the unbrotherly act of selling Joseph as a slave. Hence, none of their descendants might expect to stand up in battle against the descendant of Esau, for they who had themselves acted unnaturally to a brother could hardly hope for God's assistance in a struggle with the unbrotherly Edomites. Only the descendants of Joseph, the man who had been generous and good to his brothers, might hope that God would grant them aid against the unbrotherly descendants of Esau. In many other respects, too, Joseph was the opposite of Esau, and his services stood his descendants in good stead in their battle against the descendants of Esau. Esau was the firstborn of his father, but through his evil deeds he lost his birthright. Joseph, on the other hand, was the youngest of his father's sons, and through his good deeds he was found worthy of enjoying the rights of a firstborn son. Joseph had faith in the resurrection, while Esau denied it. Hence God said, "Joseph, the devout, shall be the one to visit merited punishment on Esau, the unbelieving." Joseph associated with two wicked men, Potiphar and Pharaoh, and yet he did not follow their example. Esau associated with two pious men, his father and his brother, yet he did not follow their example. Joseph, who did not follow the example of wicked men, shall visit punishment on him who did not follow the example of pious men. Esau soiled his life with lewdness and murder. Joseph was chaste and shunned bloodshed. Hence God delivered Esau's descendants into the hands of Joseph's descendants. And, as in the course of history, only the descendants of Joseph were victorious over the descendants of Esau. So will it be in the future at the final reckoning between the angel of Esau and the angels of the Jews. The angel of Reuben will be rebuffed by the angel of Esau with these words, "You are the one who had illegal relations with his father's wife." The angels of Simon and Levi will have to listen to this reproof. "You represent people who slew the inhabitants of Shechem." The angel of Judah will be repulsed with the words, "Judah had illicit relations with his daughter-in-law." And the angels of the other tribes will be repulsed by Esau's angel when he points out to them that they all took part in selling Joseph. The only one whom we will not be able to repulse will be Joseph's angel, to whom he will be delivered, and by whom he will be destroyed. Joseph will be the flame, and Esau the straw burned in the flame. Amalek defeated. Moses now instructed Joshua in regard to his campaign against Amalek, saying, "Choose men and go out and fight with Amalek." The words, "choose men," characterize the modesty of Moses, who treated his disciple Joshua as an equal. In these words he has taught us that the honor of our disciples should stand as high as our own. Joshua, at first, did not want to expose himself to the danger and leave the protection of the cloud. But Moses said to him, "If you hope to set the crown on your head, abandon the cloud and go forth against Amalek." He commanded him to choose his warriors from among the pious and God-fearing, and promised him that he would set a fast day for the following day, and implore God, in behalf of the good deeds of the patriarchs and the wife of the patriarchs, to stand by Israel in this war. Joshua acted in accordance with these commands, and set out against Amalek. To conquer him required not only skillful strategy, but also adeptness in the art of magic, for Amalek was a great magician and knew the strongest and weakest hour of each individual, and in this way regulated his attacks against Israel. He attacked that one by night, whose death had been predicted for a night, and him whose death had been predicted for a day, he attacked by day. But in this art, Joshua was his match, for he too knew how to time properly the attack on individuals, and he destroyed Amalek, his sons, the armies Amalek had commanded, and those that had been led by his sons. But in the very heat of battle, Joshua treated his enemies humanely. He did not repay evil with evil. Far was it from Joshua to follow Amalek's example in mutilating the corpses of the enemy. Instead, with a sharp sword he cut off the enemy's heads, an execution that does no dishonor. But only through aid of Moses did Joshua win his victory. Moses did not go out into battle, but through his prayer and through his influence on the people, in inspiring them with faith, the battle was won. While the battle raged between Israel and Amalek, Moses was stationed on a hill, where, supported by the Levite Aaron and the Judean Hur, the representatives of the two noble tribes, he fervently implored God's aid. He said, "O Lord of the world, through me you have brought Israel out of Egypt, and through me you have divided the Red Sea, and through me you have wrought miracles. So now work miracles and give victory to Israel. For I well know that all the other nations fight only to the 6th hour of the day, but this sinful nation stands in battle ranks till sunset." Moses did not consider it sufficient for him to pray to God alone, so he raised his hands towards heaven as a signal for the whole nation to follow his example and trust in God. As often as he raised his hands to heaven and the people prayed with him, trusting that God would lend them victory, they were indeed victorious. As often, however, as Moses let down his hands and the people ceased prayer, weakening in their faith in God, Amalek conquered. But it was hard for Moses constantly to raise his hands. This was God's way of punishing him for being somewhat negligent in the preparations for the war against Amalek. Hence, Aaron and Hur were obliged to hold up his arms and assist him in his prayer. As furthermore, he was unable to stand all that time, he seated himself on a stone, disdaining a soft and comfortable seat, saying, "So long as Israel is in distress, I shall share it with them." At evening the battle was not yet decided. Therefore Moses prayed to God that he might stop the setting of the sun, and thus enable Israel to draw the battle to a close. God granted his prayer, for the sun did not set until Israel had completely destroyed their enemy. Then Moses blessed Joshua with the words, "Some day the sun shall stand still for your sake, as it did today for mine." And this blessing was later fulfilled at Gibeon, where the sun stood still to help Joshua in his battle against the Amorites. Although Amalek had received merited punishment from the hands of Joshua, still his enterprise against Israel had not been entirely unavailing. The miraculous exodus of Israel out of Egypt, and especially the dividing of the sea, had created such alarm among the heathens that none of them dared to approach Israel. But this fear vanished as soon as Amalek attempted to compete in battle with Israel. Although he was terribly beaten, still the fear of the invincibility of Israel was gone. It was with Amalek as with that foolhardy one who plunged into a scalding hot tub. He scalded himself terribly, yet the tub became cold through his plunge into it. Hence, God was not content with the punishment Amalek received in the time of Moses, but swore by his throne and by his right hand that he would never forget Amalek's misdeeds, in this world as well as in the time of the Messiah. He would visit punishment upon him and would completely exterminate him in the future world. So long as the seed of Amalek exists, the face of God is, as it were, covered, and will only come into view when the seed of Amalek has been entirely exterminated. God had at first left the war against Amalek in the hands of his people. Therefore, he told Joshua, future leader of the people, never to forget the war against Amalek. And if Moses had listened intently, he would have perceived from this command of God that Joshua was intended to lead the people into the promised land. But later, when Amalek took part in the destruction of Jerusalem, God himself took up war against him, saying, "By my throne I vow not to leave a single descendant of Amalek under the heavens. No one shall even be able to say that this sheep or that belonged to an Amalekite." God told Moses to impress the Jews to turn away no heathen that should desire to convert, but never to accept an Amalekite. It was in consideration of this word of God that David slew the Amalekite who announced to him the death of Saul and Jonathan, for he saw in him only a heathen, although he appeared in the guise of a Jew. Part of the blame for the destruction of Amalek falls on his father Eliphaz. He used to say to Amalek, "My son, do you know who will possess this world and the future world?" Amalek paid no attention to this allusion to the future fortune of Israel, and his father did not impress it strongly upon him, although it was his duty to instruct his son clearly and fully. He should have said to him, "My son, Israel will possess this world as well as the future world. Dig wells for them, and build roads for them, so that you may be judged worthy to share in the future world." But as Amalek was not sufficiently instructed by his father, in his wantonness he undertook to destroy the whole world. God, who tries the heart, said to him, "You fool, I created you after the 70 nations, but for your sins you shall be the first to descend into hell." To glorify the victory over Amalek, Moses built an altar, which God called "My Miracle." For the miracle God wrought against Amalek in the war of Israel was, as it were, a miracle for God. For so long as the Israelites dwell in sorrow, God feels with them, and a joy for Israel is a joy for God. And so, the miraculous victory over Israel's foe was a victory for God. Jethro. Smite a scorner, and the simple will beware. The destruction of Amalek brought Jethro to his senses. Jethro was originally in the same plot with Amalek, both having incited Pharaoh against Israel. But when he saw that Amalek lost this world and the other, he repented of his sinful ways, saying, "There is nothing left for me but to go over to the God of Israel." And although he lived in the greatest wealth and honor, he determined to set out for the desert, to Moses and to his God. Arrived at the camp of Israel, he could not enter it, for it was enveloped by a cloud that none could pierce. So he wrote a letter to Moses and shot it off with an arrow, so that it fell into the camp. The letter read, "I adjure you, by your 2 sons and by your God, to come to meet me and receive me kindly. If you will not do it for my sake, do it for your wife's sake. And if you will not do it for her sake, do it for your son's sake." For Jethro brought with him his daughter Zipporah, from whom Moses had been divorced, as well as her 2 sons by Moses, her only children, for after her separation from Moses she had wed no other man. At first Moses was not inclined to pay attention to the letter, But God said to him, I, through whose word the world came into being, I bring men to me, and do not thrust them back. I permitted Jethro to approach me, and did not push him from me. So you too must receive this man, who desires to live himself under the wings of the Shekinah, and let him approach, and do not repulse him. Then God taught Moses that one should repulse with the left hand and beckon with the right. Moses, Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, together with the 70 elders of Israel, carrying with them the ark, went to welcome Jethro kindly. And Moses so honored his father-in-law as to make obeisance before him and kiss him. Before Moses told his father-in-law of the great miracles God had wrought, such as the Exodus, the dividing of the sea, the rain of manna, and the rest, he offered him a greeting of peace. For great is peace that precedes the praise of God. After the peace greeting, Moses, to draw his father-in-law nearer to the true faith in God and his revelation, began to relate to him the miracles that God had wrought for them at the Exodus from Egypt, during the passing through the Red Sea, and during the war with Amalek. He said, moreover, in the manna that God gives us, we perceive the taste of bread, of meat, and of fish, and in short, of all the dishes there are. Out of the well that God gives us, we draw a drink that possesses the taste of old wine as well as new, of milk and of honey, in short, of all the beverages that exist. We shall, continued Moses, receive 6 other gifts from God: the land of Israel, the future world, the new world, the sovereignty of David, the institution of priests, and of Levites. When Jethro heard all this, he determined to become a Jew and to believe in the only God. And although he felt the pang of heart upon hearing that the Egyptians had perished, for no one should scoff at the heathen unless he is not a Jew of 10 generations standing, still he burst into song of praise to God for the deeds he had done for his people. In truth, it reflects shame upon Moses and the 60 myriads of Jews that had not given thanks to God for their release from Egypt until Jethro came and did so. He said, Praise be God who delivered Moses and Aaron, as well as the whole nation of Israel from the bondage of Pharaoh, that great dragon, and of the Egyptians. Truly great is the Lord before all gods, for formerly not a single slave succeeded in escaping from Egypt. Then God led 60 myriads out of Egypt. There is no God whom I had not, at some time in my life, worshipped, but I must admit there is none like the God of Israel. This God had been known to me before, but now I know him better. For his fame will sound throughout the world, because he paid the Egyptians exactly what they had planned to undertake against Israel. They wanted to destroy Israel by water, and by water they were destroyed. Sacrifices and a feast were celebrated on the arrival of Jethro, for after he had made the burnt offering not far from the bush of thorns that had been unscathed by fire, Jethro prepared a feast of rejoicing for the whole people, at which Moses did not consider it below his dignity to wait on the guests in person. In this way he followed the example of Abraham, who, in person, waited on the 3 angels, even though they appeared in the guise of idolatrous Arabs. Moses, like Abraham, sought to follow in the ways of the Lord, to provide each according to his wants, and to grant everyone what he lacks, whether he be a righteous man or an idolater who through his sins conjures up God's wrath. To this feast the people sat down according to their tribes. They ate, drank, and were merry, while Aaron and Jethro, with their relatives, sang songs of thanksgiving to God, and praised him as the Creator and granter of their lives and liberty. At the same time, they gave due appreciation to Moses, through whose courage everything had happily come to pass. In his words of gratitude to Moses, Jethro also gave expression to many glorious eulogies towards the people of Israel, but he especially extolled Moses, who, through difficulties and dangers, had shown so much courage in the salvation of his friends. The installation of elders. Jethro, who had come to Moses shortly before the revelation on Mount Sinai, stayed with his son-in-law for more than a year. In the first months, however, he had no opportunity of observing Moses in the capacity of judge, for Moses spent the time from the day of the revelations of God to the 10th day of Tishri almost entirely in heaven. Hence, Jethro could not be present at a court proceeding of his before the 11th day of Tishri, the first day after Moses' return from heaven. Jethro now perceived how Moses sat like a king on his throne, while the people, who brought their lawsuits before him, stood around. This so displeased him that he said to his son-in-law, "Why sit alone, with all the people standing by you from morning till night?" Moses answered, "Because the people come to me to inquire concerning God. It is not in my honor that they stand, but in honor of God, whose judgment they want to know, when they are in doubt over a case of clean or unclean, or when there is a dispute between two parties which they desire to have settled according to the law, or in conformity with a compromise, they come to me, and when the parties at dispute leave me, they part as friends and are no longer enemies. I expound to the people the words of God and his decisions." On the day that Moses again took up his activity as a judge, and Jethro had for the first time the chance of observing him, there came the mixed multitude, with the plea that they, like the other Israelites, wanted their share in the Egyptians' booty. Moses' method, first seen by him in practice, struck Jethro as almost absurd, and he therefore said, "The thing you do is not good." Through delicacy he softened his real opinion, "It is bad," to "It is not good." "The people," he continued, "will surely undo you and Aaron, his two sons Nadab and Abihu, and the 70 elders, if you continue in this fashion. But if you hear my voice, you will fare well, provided God approves of my plan. It is that you shall be the vessel of the revelations of God, and shall lay the revelations of God before the people, as often as you receive them, so that they may understand the exposition of the Torah as well as its decisions. Then instruct them how to pray in the synagogues, how to tend the sick, how to bury their dead, how to render the services of friendship, how to practice justice, and how, in some cases, not to insist on strict justice. But as for trying the people as judge, you should, in accordance with your prophetic insight, choose men that are possessed of wisdom, fear of God, modesty, hate of greed, love of truth, love of humanity, and of a good name, and that these shall devote all their time to trials and to the study of the Torah. If God approves my plan, then you and Aaron, his sons, and the 70 elders, and all the people will dwell in peace." The counsel of Jethro found great favor in Moses' eyes, for he had been only all too aware of the difficulties and annoyances with which he had to contend. The people were very disputatious, being willing to spend 70 silverlings in litigation costs for the sake of gaining 1 silverling, and did their utmost to lengthen their disputes at law. When one saw that Moses was about to cast a decision against him, he demanded that his lawsuit be adjourned, declaring that he had witnesses and other proofs which he would bring forward on the next occasion. But they were not merely litigious in their disputations, they were also spiteful, and vented their temper on Moses. If Moses went out early, they would say, "Behold the son of Amram, who goes out early to gather manna, that he might get the largest grains." If he went out late, they would say, "Behold the son of Amram, he goes through the multitude to gather in marks of honor." But if he chose a path aside from the crowd, they said, "Behold the son of Amram, who makes it impossible for us to follow the simple commandment to honor a sage." Then Moses said, "If I did this, you were not content, and if I did that, you were not content. I can no longer bear you alone. The Eternal, your God, has multiplied you, and behold, you are this day as the stars of heavens for multitude. The Lord, God of your fathers, will make you 1,000 times as many as you are now, and bless you as he has promised." The Israelites were not content with this blessing of Moses and said, "O our teacher Moses, we do not desire you to bless us. We have had much greater blessings given to us by God, the God of our father Abraham, who said, 'I will bless you and multiply you. I will multiply your seed as the stars of heaven and as the sand of the sea.' But you limit our blessings." Moses cried, "I am only a creature of flesh and blood, limited in my powers. So is my blessing limited. But the blessing of God remains preserved for you, and he will bless you unlimitedly, and multiply you as the fish of the ocean and the sands of the sea, as the stars in the sky and the plants on the earth." After he had bestowed this blessing on them, he asked them to propose capable, pious men, that he might appoint them as judges and leaders. He said, "If a man were to present himself to me as a candidate for this position of honor, I alone should not be able to decide to which tribe he belonged and whence he came. But you know them, so it is advisable that you propose them. Do not think, however, that I feel I must abide by your choice, for it depends solely upon me, whether or not I shall appoint them." The people were very eager to put this plan of Moses into execution, and requested him to settle the matter as quickly as possible. But their motive was self-interested, for every one of them said, "Moses will now appoint about 80,000 officials. If I myself should not be among them, surely my son will be, and if not he, my grandson. And with a gift of some kind, it will be an easy matter to induce such a judge to look after my interests at court." Moses, of course, was not deceived about their true sentiments. Still, he paid no further attention to them and picked out the best men among the people, though they were not possessed of nearly all the good qualities Jethro had thought essential for judges. With kindly words he invited them to assume their offices and said, "Blessed are you that are judged worthy of being leaders of the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, of a people whom God has called his friends, his brothers, his flock, and other titles of love." He impressed upon them that they must possess much patience, and not become impatient if a lawsuit is brought before them more than once. "Before," he said, "you belonged to yourselves, but from now on you belong to the people, for you judge between every man and his brother and his neighbor. If you are to appoint judges, do so without respect of persons. Do not say, 'I will appoint that man because he is a handsome man, or a strong man, because he is my kinsman, or because he is a linguist.' Such judges will declare the innocent guilty and the guilty innocent, not through wickedness, but through ignorance. And God will reckon the appointment of such judgments against you as a perversion of justice on account of your respect of persons. If a wealthy man and a poor man come to court before you, do not say to yourself, 'Why should I insult the rich man for so small a matter? I would rather give judgment in his favor, and then, outside the court, tell him to give the poor man what he demands, as he is in the right.' On the other hand, if a poor man is in the wrong, do not say to yourself, 'The rich man is obliged to assist the poor anyway, so I will decide in favor of the poor, that in a decent way he may, without begging, obtain money from this rich man.' Again, do not say to yourself, 'I fear to pronounce judgment, lest that man kill my son, burn my barn, or destroy my plants. For the judgment is God's.'" After these admonitions, Moses instructed the new judges in legal procedure, in both civil and criminal cases, and at the same time urged the people not to deny the judges the veneration due them. For great is the importance of justice. For he who hates it, there is no remedy. But the judge who decides conscientiously is the true peacemaker, for the health of Israel, of the commonwealth, and indeed of all living creatures. Next, Jethro rewarded. End part 49 of 95, thelegensofthejews.com.